Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sophie Doucet, and I'm on the marketing team here at RocketSpace. We are a technology campus that helps tech startups bring the future to market. We believe that young companies are like young people. You're a product of your environment. So we created a unique ecosystem where they can work surrounded by similarly driven and high-growth startup teams, plus services to help support your growth and success. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Sachin today for today's webinar. I'll introduce him in just a moment, but first, a few light housekeeping items. The platform that we're using today, GoToWebinar, has several really useful features. If you scroll down the menu, you'll notice the questions section. We are going to save some time for Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please do submit those for us. There is also a section for comments. I will be monitoring and replying to comments live, so if you're having technical difficulties, have feedback to share or comments for us, please do send those our way. And last but not least, GoToWebinar also supports polls, so we're going to send some polls for you to vote on as we go along. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Sachin Dev Duggal. So at 32, Sachin is an innovator, a serial entrepreneur, and an advocate of enterprise that touches lives and benefits the world at large. He is the co-founder of SD2, a business spanning cloud consultancy, engineering as a service, and an interesting portfolio of investments that touch social, content, wearable, and augmented reality. He exited his last company, Niveo, after taking it to $100 million and sits on the Indian Prime Minister's Extended Council of Technology. The 2009 World Economic Forum Tech Pioneer, Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and PwC Leader of Tomorrow. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Sachin. I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. So welcome everyone to the webinar where we're going to try and keep this light, but also give you really bite-sized things that you can take away with. As an example, some of the things that we're going to show and talk about are things that we've done for customers, but also for our own portfolio companies. One of them being Shoto, which is a photo app that lets you get the pictures you didn't take. And I strongly recommend, my only plug in this webinar is that you download the app, and we have a special version for everyone on this webinar if you go to shoto.com/preview. And any feedback you have, that'd be great. But a lot of the lessons that I'm going to cover and the actionable items today are really from our 2 years of trying to growth hack, trying to find viral coefficient, trying to measure the right metrics, and ensuring that we stay focused on the right indicators for launch. So today's talk is about this idea of insanely effective user acquisition hacks. But you know, often when we talk about user acquisition, we always think it's just about audience or just about referral. But actually, if you take a 360 view, it's about audience, engagement, referral, but also launch. Because ultimately, you need to get a lot of things lined up before launch. Launch is not just publish it and they shall come. And a part of that is because the world we live in today has so much noise in the apps that are available, in the services that are available, in the things that are being pushed to users, that you really have to rise above it, and you've got to create a mini avalanche before you go live. Engagement is also very important because really without engagement, you have no way of getting users excited enough to tell their friends. By far, the most impactful thing that you can do from a user acquisition hack is to increase the probability that someone's going to talk about it, or what we call word of mouth. There's a test that we've done, and we've also referred a bunch of our customers to do, which is go to a railway station, take an unbranded version of your app, and keep talking about it to strangers until they ask you 2 questions. Is it available, or what's it called? And make a note of what you said literally just before that. And those kind of things become really important when you're building that early audience, when you're testing whether what you've just said was engaging, and whether people are really likely to refer the audience forward or not. So without much further ado, we're going to go through a bunch of slides. There'll be some polls that come up just to kind of see what the audience is thinking, what the pulse of the audience is, but more importantly, to get a good segment. And then we'll be following up with a blog post, adjusting this content a bit more to see the reactions that we got as we went through. So the most important thing is we're often told, get this small little engine working, focus on that engine, focus on your core users. And whilst it's important to care for your core users, we often have, and I've seen this in 90% of the cases, especially in our investment arm, we often have a situation where people build for core and then they forget the audience. And so if you thought about your demographic as core users, monthly active, signed up or downloaded, and then the really big one, which is audience, we should actually be building most of our feature set for audience. And the reason is that's going to be the people, that is the widest audience, the widest probability of conversion, and the widest probability that you're going to be successful. When you build for core users, you make a bunch of mistakes. One of them is you build for people that already understand how to use the basic service. So you forget the need to make things really simple, things like onboarding, things like getting permission. And often there's a triangle that I always see, that I often tell people, which is, what is the magic moment? You know, what is magic in this app? What's the magic in this service? Then the next question is, what is the critical action to get magic? And then the final one is, how do you make sure that 100% of your audience can get magic? If you are able to nail that triangle, then by default, your core users will be super happy, but you'll have a very large word of mouth, referral, but also a very engaging experience for your users. So care for core, build for audience. And that means the widest possible reach. The other part, when you think about audience, is that a lot of us, when we're in Silicon Valley, when we're in London, when we're in Northern Europe, we think about the world as our city, or as our state, or as our country. And granted, the US is infinitesimally larger than the UK, but you know, in the UK, we think about the world as London, and maybe a little bit further out. What we've seen, and when we pushed out the last version of Shoto, there's a new version coming out that you're getting a preview for, but we pushed out in 5 languages. We pushed out in Mandarin. So we had a large portion of Asia. We pushed out in Hindi, that gave us more augmented Asian market. We pushed out in French, Spanish, and also Arabic. And that instantly meant that we were available to some of the fastest growing mobile markets in the world. As you see on the graph that I'm showing you from our friends at Destimo, you know, if you look at applications that have localization, they get an average of 128% download increase in the first week. And so, and when you look at platforms like Android, it's even more so, because Android is so much more prevalent in some of the emerging markets. As an example, India is going to add about 400 million people to the mobile market in the next 5 years. E-commerce is going to grow from 15 billion to 100 billion. And if you're not targeting that demographic in its early stage, you're already reducing your audience size just to be in the market that you can maybe touch and feel. And I understand it's far away, it's difficult, but you know, doing localization, building the app to support localization, these things aren't too difficult. The other thing I'd say, not only Apple, but be nice to Apple, be nice to Google. It is so important for you to build a relationship with the stores. And that can mean, you know, sending an email to Apple Store Promotion. It could mean finding an App Store manager that looks at your category, you know, things like using Hunter to find the Chrome extension. But building a relationship really helps. But also be careful, because people are now very known to be reaching out with a single agenda, but Apple's not in the business of just featuring anyone and everyone that writes into them. Neither is Google. I think what you have to do is create a story around Apple strategy, just like if somebody was coming to pitch to you. So if you know the next version of the iOS platform is coming out, or if you know the next version of macOS is coming out, and you can optimize to showcase some of their features, that's when you're likely to get it. If you know that Apple's got a big education push and you're building something around education, you can again become in their feature list. And usually the process is you speak to the App Store manager, they speak to the editorial team, your app is suggested, and you know, after a few times round, it doesn't happen instantly, it could be 2, 3, 4, you're likely to get featured. And there's a set format. They want to see a one-page deck. They want to see what's different. They also want to see what else you're doing. Apple and Google will not really be too motivated unless it's a blowout app. They're not going to be that interested unless you're also doing some activity around the site. The other part in terms of audience is, you know, we often say, oh, someone's churned out, they're not interested. But actually, if you're able to give product value to lapsed users, you're actually going beyond that core audience space. So you're going to that, you know, signed up audience, which is, okay, not as big as audience, but it's the second biggest concentric circle. And that audience is very important. If you're able to get part of that audience back, you're automatically in a position to reduce churn. And Popcorn Metrics, as an example, increased their actual revenue by almost 400% in just 12 weeks. And communication can be in person or face-to-face. Tools like Intercom, Mixpanel, where you can do segmented conversation, pick up the chat conversation, have a chat with someone. These things really help. And if you're able to have this conversation with churn users, you're able to understand what got them to leave. And if you're able to fix that, ultimately your funnel is just so much richer and better. So speaking of app stores, speaking of audience, so you've done the right thing. You've spoken to Apple, you've spoken to Google, you've got all these things moving. They don't happen overnight. One of the things that you should also start doing is working out how do you get your listing up in the App Store. So there's a lot of what we call organic downloads, and there are many hacks. And obviously, as with all hacks, they have a time to live, they last, and then they go out of date. The two that are still fairly prominent is one, just like in search, you did SEO and you optimized for AdWords and so on and so forth. Similarly, with the app stores, you can do app store optimization. It's not something that I recommend you do yourselves. It's become a science. There are companies that are great at this. GummyCube is one of them. And you obviously want to make sure you're tracking your rankings, so whether you use App Annie or Mobile Action. It's really important that you get your app store optimization done, because it's just going to keep moving you up the ranks, and it will start getting you trickle users at the beginning, and then can add as much as 100, 1,000, 10,000 users a day, especially when you start getting the right ranking. Augmented with that is in a lot of in both Google and in iOS, they have trending, different terminology for each. And there are some really interesting hacks that you can do for trending. You could run a Facebook or a Twitter campaign that takes people to a landing page. When they go to the landing page, instead of telling them to download the app, what you're saying to them is, click on here to search for our app. And when they hit the button, it opens up the app store on their phone. They type in your product name, it shows up, they tap on it. Suddenly, you get 1,000 people doing that, 500 people doing that, even 100 people doing that in a short amount of time, and you get picked up in the ranking. Obviously, someone's been talking about you, someone's been in the press, or you've obviously hacked your way through. And that's a very good way to start writing trending. And both trending and ASO will ensure that you get an organic flow of traffic coming through. Now, the most important thing with apps is you have to nail onboarding. So more than 90% of apps have missed opportunities during the onboarding experience. And what's staggering is that on average, they're losing 50% of users. People forget that you have a very short amount of time. You can't answer too many things up front. You're fighting for space on the screen, because while somebody may have 200 apps installed, what they regularly use is the amount they can count on their hands. And so nailing your onboarding, making sure you're measuring it, making sure you're doing split testing around those pieces, they're very, very important. We've built a custom split testing platform that's helped us in Shoto, and that we've also now pushed out to some of our customers. And it allows us to change parts of the onboarding experience without having to resubmit, which means that we can very quickly learn, be very agile, because nailing onboarding is critical. If your first screen is not clear about what it does, if you're asking for permissions before the user is ready to give you them, if you're not soft asking for permissions, often we just ask for permissions, bang, 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 and if the person doesn't know what you are or what you're doing and they're not 100% sure, which is the case with organic or trending, then they're likely to just reject the permission. Once a permission gets rejected, you're not likely to get it back. Previously, Android didn't have this issue, but as a part of material design, even Android now has the requirement for you to actually ask for the permissions up front. So there's ways to do soft asks, and we'll make sure that in the blog post we cover those examples for you, because I think it's very important to get that right. The other piece, and there's very anecdotal evidence below, but promise less and over-deliver. A lot of the times, services and applications are over-promising, under-delivering. And what you're doing is you're getting users to be generally underwhelmed. When a user becomes underwhelmed, it's a real problem. And they're never able to get off the bat and really start enjoying and liking your service. So here's some proof. Waiters increased their tips by 23%. We're returning to the table with a second set of men. So whatever you can do, whatever you can ensure in your marketing message, keep it sincere. And specifically because this channel of apps, this channel of web services, most things that we're working on these days, you're going into a fairly exhausted channel. And if you're not measured in your approach, if you're not sincere and transparent, the likelihood is you're going to burn those users quite quickly. 54 seconds. So this is the amount of time we have before someone kills the app. Now, actually, you could argue that this time has become less. And so in those 54 seconds, you have to be able to deliver magic. So go back to that triangle. What is magic? How do we deliver it? And how do we make sure 100% of people can achieve it? And we need to make sure that entire equation happens in less than 50 seconds. 54. If 54, if you want to be precise, 50 seconds otherwise. For those of you joining in, we'll do a recap as we get towards the end of the quick summary. As you're getting towards launch and you're getting towards building that initial traction of users, as I mentioned before, it's really important for you to set up an avalanche. So YouTube videos, there's a bunch of platforms that will let you get YouTube stars to talk about, endorse your product. That will get you 500, 1,000, if you're really lucky, 2,000 or 3,000 downloads. That's a great way to get your first set of users. Not great for mass adoption. Then you've got Thunderclap, which is great for initial downloads. You should do it before Product Hunt because Product Hunt is now much more prime time. These two things help you to synchronize that launch experience with whatever else you're doing, which is press, directories, making sure that you're kind of ready to rock and roll out of the door. The other thing to do, which is very important, is you've got to leverage directory. So list your app in as many places as you can, time the listing. If you're doing Product Hunt, make sure that you get one of the makers to push you out. The ideal time to push it out if you're on the West Coast is to make sure that it goes out well in advance, about 6 a.m., 7 a.m. in the morning. So you're one of the first ideas out there, and then you've got to hustle your Facebook friends, hustle friends on Twitter, hustle everyone else to make sure that you're getting the right outputs. But you've got to be careful. You can't go asking for them because the minute you do that, Product Hunt and others are likely to either scrub the listing, reduce your positioning. The most important thing in this is you want to be in the top 10, ideally in the top 5 before the end of the day, because it means you go out in the email that goes out the next morning of the most talked about products. When we did this, we got literally thousands of downloads as we came up in the email the next day. So when you think about engagement and you think about user experience, the other thing to do always is map out your process, right? Map out that flow. When is the user going to get excited? What is magic for the user? At what point do we deliver the magic? And then see if there's a way to use bots or electronic computer robots that can synthesize the user experience. Hacking supply, hacking content to ensure a user never has an empty screen, a user never has a single friend problem, a user never has the fact that they come into an app that sort of looks like they're the first person. Whilst everyone wants to be the coolest person on the block and that they want to be the one that's talking about something, they also don't want to be the first person in the experience because at that point, they really have nothing to do with the app, and it's a lot of work. There's a professor at Stanford that teaches a design model called the Fog model, BJ Fogg, and I had the distinct pleasure of going to his lectures. And one of the things that he mentioned is that behaviors come together when 3 things happen: motivation, ability, and a trigger. So the point is, if there's a latent motivation for what you're trying to deliver, i.e. the magic, and people are really wanting to do it, then you have to make sure that you tackle ability and trigger. Trigger is at what point do they install the app, what point do they use the app, at what point do they come back, and ability is how easy it is to use. And a part of ease and a part of trigger always comes down to the zero network, zero content problem. So make sure that you build bots that create engagement and allow users to really kind of start using and experiencing what your app is about. Hack channels. So emails still work. In our experience from the various properties we've worked on and built, they still remain more powerful than text and SMS. A lot of people get very private when you send a text message, especially in North America. Other parts of the world, it seems to be a much more open method of communication. But in the US, email is still the preferred method of communication. The second thing is drive referrals using any way possible. So whether it's app virality, through SMS, through email, through Twitter, give as many options to people to either share content or invite people or refer what you're doing. The other part, which is very important, is see what else your users are doing. And if there's a way for you to partner with them that you can run on top of their network. That's really powerful. If you're looking at the Asian market as an example, one thing you can do is you can tie up with companies that give data free to users as long as they do key actions in your app. So for example, if someone installed Shoto and got 3 friends, we would give them 500 megs of free data. And not only is that incentivizing, but it's also making sure that they can use the data not only on other apps, but also for your own apps. So if you're using it and you're consuming it and you're making it free to the end user, there's also something really powerful about that. There's something to also be said about not necessarily having the app free. We're so in the world of everything being free that often, without someone spending something anecdotally, there's not real value for them. And because there's no value, there's no skin in the game, why would they use it? And you're reliant then purely on social push. By using what WhatsApp did, which is it's $1, but they didn't charge $1 for everyone. But people suddenly realized the value of what was going on, and $1 is a very small amount of money. And look at how successful they've been. And you can't say that the entire success is predicated on the dollar model, but it definitely helps in the beginning. It also makes sure that you're building features that stand you out, because you're going to have to market that communication. As I mentioned earlier, you should look beyond San Francisco, not only from a language perspective, but also from any kind of offline activity. There's a general app fatigue when you look on the West Coast and even in North America to some extent. And you really want to be going beyond that and looking at Asia, looking at India, looking at the Middle East, as there's such a large population of users that are coming online. And for them, it's like a first-time experience. If you're able to get mind share there, look at companies like Truecaller, look at even WhatsApp, which was bought by Facebook for some $19 billion. All of these companies started outside of the US, and they nailed a market that was ripe for demand. Whereas starting in San Francisco and fighting against every other app developer, I would almost say every other indie app developer, it's very difficult. If you think about the US App Store listings, I think almost 90% of the top 10 apps are provided by 4 or 5 companies. And the likelihood that you make it into those categories and are a leader is very, very difficult. It's not to say it's impossible, but it's very, very difficult. And it probably makes more sense to focus on others where you can get reach, you can test product fit, you can test rollout, you can test messaging, and then come to the US. Or do it even in parallel, but focus on the outreach. That market is growing much faster and is a lot bigger and a lot cheaper to acquire users. Ask for ratings in the right way. A lot of the times, if you just blindly ask for ratings, would you review our app? What do you think? You're likely to get people either dismissing it, which means you can't ask again, or the second thing is they'll open it and give you a lackluster rating. What you want to do instead is go back to that. What is magic? How do I deliver magic? What is the critical action for magic? And then when those actions are completed and magic has been delivered, that's the point at which you want to attract users. So segmenting your users into positive users, segmenting your users into hardcore users, very active users, all of those things become really powerful because that's a great way to be able to target conversation. The other thing to also think about, and what's not on this slide, is the idea that you should adjust your app so that segmentation really helps users in the experience you're delivering. Someone's an early user, you don't want to really be giving them all the bells and whistle features. You want to be taking them through how they get friends on, what's that initial experience, how they see magic. But someone who's a rockstar user, you don't also want to make it too simple. So having your app almost be alive is really an important part of the jigsaw. Know your numbers. In anything you're going to do about growth hacking, launching, viral coefficient, if you don't know what the numbers are, downloads don't matter because you can hack them. You can do instant downloads and a bunch of things. And if you raise a decent whopping seed round, you can easily get to 500, 750,000 downloads by just buying your way through. That's not going to give you a great indicator for how the product's going to work. You've got to be really focused on cohort-based viral coefficient. It's super important. And there's lots of calculations on the internet. But the basic logic is I've got to add more users. My existing users have to add more users than I'm losing. So if you have a churn of 40% and you've got an app that's viral in nature, you need to make sure that you're at least at 1.5 viral coefficient to compensate for the fact that you're losing 40% of users. The other part, which is very important, is retention, and a metric that we use a lot, which is called 7D5, which is how many of your audience have used the app 5 days out of the last 7. And this is really essential, because knowing what kind of engagement you have, knowing how people are using it from the entire audience in the last week or in the last 2 weeks, 3 days, 73, 75, these are really important metrics to understand, because also as you build things and improve things, they're going to give you a much better advice on how to move forward. Any questions?
We do have some questions. You can actually see them in your panel.
Okay. Question, I do not see them.
Here, so what we're going to do, since I do have access to the questions, is I've picked out a couple I thought we could start with, so I'll go ahead and ask them to you, Sachin. The first one that was interesting was, how do you increase the likelihood of getting featured in the App Store? Do you have some specific best practices you can share with our attendees?
Sure. I think the important thing to do is first build a relationship and don't sell. The second thing to do is time yourself, just like any other business would, time yourself to what Apple's doing. Are they pushing a new version of an operating system? Are they pushing education? Are they pushing go to school? What are they pushing? Are they pushing Valentine's Day? And get yourself a heads up, and then build your strategy around that. And the third thing is, don't just rely on that. They're not going to be the bat that swings for you and the only bat that swings. They want to make sure that you're equally invested in pushing your product out. Also remember this, getting featured and not having a nailed product is a disaster. Because the minute you get featured and you get millions of downloads and then you lose 1 million users, you're almost dead. And whilst the euphoria of having 1 million downloads is fantastic, if you don't have the ability to actually retain those users, that's a bit of a problem.
All right, and on to our next question. Folks have been asking if you could repeat the 3 corners of the triangle. What is magic? How do I deliver magic? And also expand on that a little bit further too.
So if you think about everything we build, and you go back to Fogg's design model, behaviors come together when 3 things happen: motivation, ability, and a trigger. And I'll give you an example. So if my aunt created the Girl Scouts, and 10 years later they come to me and they're like, oh, the Girl Scouts need money. And assuming I have $100,000 in my account, they're asking for $1 million. I'm super motivated because it was, it's a family legacy. They're asking for $1 million. I only have 100,000. I don't have the ability. So you can't, you can ask me at any time. I'm not going to go through the action. So you're never going to create that behavior. Similarly now, it wasn't my aunt, but it was my great aunt who did it. And they're asking for $100, and I have $10,000 in my account. The likelihood that I go ahead with that behavior now is very high, because the ability is easy. Depending on when you trigger me, if you catch me in the middle of a conference call, probably not. If you catch me when I'm a little bit open, I'm likely to give you the $100. The behavior is created. So similarly, when you look at magic is really about something that's going to drive that motivation. It's either dopamine or anxiety in a lot of the cases. So dopamine is I upload to Facebook, people like a photo, lots of people like it, I get dopamine, that's my motivation. Or anxiety is, what BlackBerry used to do with the red light. I saw the red light, I got anxious, I opened my phone, wanted to clean it, get rid of the red light. Every time the red light came back in, almost created a feedback loop. You created a behavior which said red light means open phone. And so a behavior was created. And so when you go back to the triangle, the most important thing is, what is magic? So what is the one thing that your experience, whether it's a wearable, an app, or a site does, what is that one thing that is going to blow people's minds? And the next question is, what is the action needed to make sure people receive that one thing? So if it is dopamine, and that's the magic you're giving, or if it's the ability to get photos you didn't take, what is the one thing people have to do to be able to get that? And then the real question is, how do you make sure that as close to 100% of people are able to do that action? So for example, if you have an app that lets you get photos that your friends take, and you have no friends on the app, it's unlikely that you're going to get 100% of people to achieve that magic. So now you have to go fix that problem of, how do I get zero network? How do I get 3 people to join? What do I do? And some of them can just be gating. You can't come in until you have 3 friends. Some of them can be controlled markets. And some of it can be just more elaborate onboarding experiences that are focused on inviting.
Thanks, Sachin. We do have a few more questions for you. And so everybody listening in, by the way, you can still submit your questions, so do keep sending them in. The next question is about more towards the beginning of your presentation. when you spoke about having only 54 seconds before new users would delete your app. Does that include onboarding? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It does, in short. And the idea is that from when someone downloads your app till the point they work out if it's worthwhile, I call this time to magic. Time to magic is 50 seconds. And yes, it seems very harsh, but that's the average. And the idea is that you will lose some people even before they sign up. You will lose people because they don't understand the perception of magic in your onboarding copy. They don't understand the perception of magic in your splash screen. There are a number of places in the onboarding flow that you will lose users. The second place where you will lose users is in asking for permissions. If you're asking for permissions too much up front and they're not necessary, don't ask for them. If you're asking for permissions over 4 screens when you could condense it and ask for it in 1 screen, that's much better to do. You want to basically condense it so that time to magic is no more than a minute.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sachin. One more question. Could you repeat again and elaborate on which aspect of the app corresponds to the trigger from Fog's modal?
So triggers are notifications. Triggers are emails. Triggers are things that users are doing to each other. So for example, in the case of Shoto, when we find, one of the things we do is we take the pictures on your phone, we take the pictures on your friend's phone, and we create these albums. And then we tell you who else has pictures from that album. Now, when we tell you that, we have to send you a text message, or we have to send you an email or something to let you know, hey, by the way, your best friend has photos from last night. That's the trigger to get you into the app. Because what's the behavior we're trying to create? The behavior we're trying to create is open the app, go to album match. What's the motivation? Anxiety. I want to see the pictures that I didn't take. Make it super easy. So they come in and it's right in front of them. And then you're left with the trigger, which is at what point do I tell the person you should come into the app because this wonderful thing is there waiting for you.
Great, thank you. So we want to save a little bit of time to recap all of the points, Sachin, but we have time for one more question. So with the thousands, millions of apps in the market today across hundreds of business verticals, how does anyone or their app break out of the information bomb?
So it's an interesting question. And I think the thing to realize is 95% of apps are built just for the founders. And so the most important question is don't think about scale and launching till you reach product fit. Getting to 1,000 users is not difficult. It's super easy. It's 4 or 5 days of hustle. If you can't do the 4 or 5 days of hustle to 1,000 to 5,000 users, you're going to have a much bigger problem down the line. So you're better off naming that 5,000 audience on your own, however you hustle it, whether it's thunderclap. Don't do PR. Don't go to anything else. Because the thing is, the minute you do that, you've lost your first open market launch strategy. The second is you're also going out half-baked because you don't know if what you've built is the right experience for users. So you're much better off trying to get 1,000 people, trying to get even 500 people, if you're really good, 5,000 people, and just closing that community and getting everything out of them about how they're using it. And really tighten down the fact that people can't invite someone else. And as it always happens, the minute you do that, people really want to invite someone else. It's that nature of what you can't get. The second is you've got to make sure that your communication is simple. You will weed out of the storm, per se, and be visible if what you're doing is very easy to understand and it comes referred by a friend or someone that they know or something that they're reading, which is, I would say, a second rating of importance. But if someone tells me to download an app, it's really good, and they download it and they tell me right now, I'd probably download it. If I read an ad and I saw it, I'm automatically down to maybe 20% of click-through.
All right, Sachin. I know that we said that was going to be our last question, but we're going to try to squeeze one very last one in. What are the ways of bringing back not so active users, the ones that don't fit the 75?
So not active is not 75. Not active, I would say, is people that have not come into the app for 2 weeks or a month. And the way to come back to them is, again, you have to understand why someone doesn't come back. They didn't see the magic. So going back to them with the same marketing message is not going to be creating any more magic. I think what you have to do is for audiences that are churning out, for a percentage, you're going to have a conversation. That might be magical because not many app vendors are going to talk to their customers. The second part of it is you've got to work out for that audience, segment them. How many people could have got magic and didn't get it? How many people would have never got magic because they had no friends on there? And so what we started doing is going back to users, effectively starting next week, and saying, almost as back as a year ago, hey, by the way, do you know you have 200 photos on Shoto that you've not seen? And the minute I do that, I'm taking anxiety into overdrive.
Great. So now to finish things up, could you briefly recap the main points for us?
Sure. Most important thing, if we go to the first slide, it's a 360-degree view. You've got to focus on audience, not just core users. That means the largest possible demographic of users. You have to nail engagement within the app. If you don't engage, you're not going to get people to do a referral. Referral is very important. Email works really well. Be really careful about how you use text messaging and other things. And then the last piece, which is really key, is make sure your launch strategy is an avalanche. Whether it's speaking to Apple, start that in advance, getting things listed on Thunderclap, getting your plan for product hunt in place, getting your PR strategy sorted, it's all got to come together. The most important thing is please do not launch until you reach product market fit. Keep it tight and closed.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Sachin. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We did get a lot of questions asking if we would send out the slides after. So yes, we will send out a recording of the webinar. I know that Sachin's team is also going to be hard at work writing a recap blog post with some extra insights for you. So we'll send that to all of you as well. And if you're interested about Shoto, the website is www.shoto.com. And if you're interested in RocketSpace in our campus, it's www.rocketspace.com. Thank you again so much. We hope to see you at another webinar or an event soon.